Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. So we're going to get a little weird tonight, and this is the sort of thing that I know drives some people absolutely up the wall, but I believe that it is part of keeping an open mind, and you know, I understand it can be frustrating when you're given false hope, right? And that's not my intention, because I am not telling you that anything is actually happening. I'm simply passing on some stuff that is floating around out there, a lot of which is frankly on the rather incredible side, if not the totally impossible to believe side. But I think it's important to know about these things, just because you never know. And you know, one of the bywords that you'll see me say a lot is that the world is stranger than we know, it's stranger than we imagine. You know, I've been reading this, The Physics of Christianity by a gentleman by the name of Frank Tipler. He's a mathematician and physicist at Tulane, and he publicly endorsed my Mittens model, the mathematical impossibility of the theory of evolution by natural selection, which was encouraging because the guy is clearly very smart. But I assure you, the stuff that he's talking about in that book is much, much crazier and harder to believe than any of the stuff that I've been reading about the current situation. Now, I think it's important to remember that hope is a virtue. The Rogue Roman points out that John C. Wright actually references this gentleman in Superluminary. So this guy is definitely a heavyweight. I mean, I can understand what he's talking about, but in terms of actually going through all of the quantum mechanics and so forth, I got to admit, I pretty much just skip over that. It's like, you know, I'm just willing to take you at your word on that you can describe this stuff competently. I have no doubt that I could master it if I wanted to spend a few months working on it, but no thank you. It's just not worth it. Anyhow, I was just like, let's just get to the ideas, okay? So I've been following some of these randos on the internet, and they're they keep talking. It's basically like offshoots of Q, although some of them considerably predate Q. And recently Alex Jones had one of these guys on his show. He's a Swiss guy. His father was involved with the original World Economics Forum. I think he was a bit of a bigwig in Asian banking circles, and he's believed to have been he was assassinated years ago, and his son lives in Switzerland and is running around telling everybody that and this is how crazy it is, that JFK is still alive despite being 97 or something. JFK Jr. is alive. They're somehow involved with Q. Donald Trump and the Space Force are actually in control of everything, and that there's been this covert war going on, um, for years. If I mean, it's been going on longer than that, but it went hot um, back in 2019. Um, COVID was sort of the last gasp of the evil folks, um, the global Satanists, et cetera, et cetera. And um, and he talks specifically, I mean, just quite openly, saying that various public figures, names that we all know, people that we all recognize, are actually no more. That they were all flown to Guantanamo and put down. Um, Now here's where it starts to get interesting. So if you've just got one person talking about that, I mean he's talking about Hillary Clinton, Klaus Schwab, Anthony Fauci, um, the British royal family, Joe Biden, and a number of other people. He's saying all of them that they are no more, that they've all been executed for their crimes against humanity. Now, that sounds absolutely, totally, and utterly absurd, right? I mean, forget the JFK stuff. He doesn't claim to be able to prove that or anything. Um, but he claims that all this other stuff will come out. So, my initial impression would be to just completely ignore that, right? I mean, you've got all kinds of attention seekers saying all kinds of crazy stuff all the time, right? But there's also this equally crazy guy, actually in some ways seemingly crazier guy, named Benjamin Fulford, who apparently lives in Japan. And he's been talking about this stuff since like 2012. And he likes to use the terms White Dragon Society, talking about this group of predominantly Asians who have been attempting to fight back against the global Satanry. Now, the one reason that I'm willing to pay these guys a modicum of attention, other than the fact that, it's, if nothing else, it's better than the average science fiction being written, is that unlike the mainstream media, unlike the mainstream churches, unlike the average person you talk about on the street, these guys are specifically addressing what we know to exist, which is the global Satanist. They talk about how these globalists are actively evil. They've been saying this longer than we have, at least in the case of the guy in Japan. The other guy, no, he was actually, he's a bit late to the table, late to the thing. He, in fact, talked about how he had gotten vaccinated a couple times. So clearly he wasn't. We're obviously not dealing with somebody who's at all paranoid, because clearly he's not anywhere near paranoid enough, right? Pretty much all of us are farther out on that spectrum than this particular guy. So, here's the interesting thing, is the guy in Japan is saying exactly the same stuff. He's saying that King Charles is already gone. He's actually, they're both saying essentially that the entire British royal family is gone, and that they were heavily involved in all this stuff. And they also both, not both of them, the guy in Japan talks specifically about how Ukraine is essentially the last bastion of the deep state of what we call clown world. And that's why the evil leaders of the skin suit West, Macron, Biden, Romney, Boris Johnson, etc., that's why they have been so desperate to try to prevent Russia from doing what they're doing. Now think about this. You've got this crazy talk, but who else is using some of the very same language? Donald Trump occasionally does, occasionally has. Vladimir Putin openly talks about it. He openly talks about the empire of lies. He openly talks about the need to denazify not only Ukraine, but Europe and the West. Furthermore, as Rogue Roman says, this fits with some of the anomalies we've seen. There is something going on with all of the global Satanist elite. Where are they? They just held the World Economic Forum and nobody was there. Where was Klaus Schwab? Whoever is playing Joe Biden is obviously wearing a rubber mask. And they're hiding him. They've been hiding him for years. All of the anomalies related to the fictitious Oval Office set, the weird stuff related to the inaugural ceremonies that took place at the wrong time with the wrong number of gunshots, etc., etc., etc. And so, I don't pretend to know what's going on. I hope these guys are telling the literal truth. I would like nothing better at this point in time than to see the global Satanists completely taken down and destroyed. I mean, the world is fallen. Things are not going to be perfect until Jesus comes back and, we're actually being ruled directly by God. But one thing is clear is that the randos on the internet are not only as reliable as CNN and as Fox News, they're more reliable. I'm more reliable. And I don't know anything. We do know about the importance of the esoteric symbolism to the Satanists. It's not an accident that the horses were running covered in blood through London. It's not an accident when these things happen. One of the things that they reported about, I personally think that Princess Catherine is dead. I think that the story that she was sacrificed in a desperate attempt by these people to try to retain their power would be the most logical explanation for why she's disappeared. Those videos that were released were obviously fake. Hey, she took a picture of her kid. That proves she's... here's the thing. There's no proof of life. There's no proof of life with most of these people. I'm sitting here live streaming I can mention something that just happened today, like, for example, the airstrikes on the city of Rafah by the IDF. You know, this is me. You know, I'm talking about an event that just happened. You know, it's not possible for this to have been faked. There's absolutely no reason that Princess Catherine couldn't have shown up at the Met Gala, or King Charles couldn't have shown up at the Met Gala that's taking place tonight. You know, and instead of just disproving the quote-unquote crazy internet rumors, you have this big media campaign of faux outrage saying, how dare you question the story that Princess Catherine just had a little operation and then decided to completely disappear from the public after doing daily public events for years. You know, I mean, the woman literally made a public appearance about 30 minutes after she gave birth. And then suddenly we're supposed to believe that she just can't she can't bear the public pressure. It's nonsense. Dan in Alabama says King Charles III dead too. That's what both of the sources that I've mentioned are saying. Now, obviously, there's somebody who is walking around having pictures taken who's supposed to be King Charles, but, you know, frankly, I don't know. I mean, there's a Joe Biden figure walking around too. You know, he's clearly, obviously, not Joe Biden. If you've paid any attention to politics over the last 20 years, you can see it's not Joe Biden. He's got a different nose, different ears, different eyes, different hair. You know, there's none of it. None of it's real. So, given that we already know that there is a global Satanist elite, given that we already know that there's a fake Joe Biden that is being passed off by the media as the real Joe Biden, given that we know all these things, how can we count any of this stuff out? We can't, not logically. And, you know, it's also very clear that China is deeply, deeply involved in some of this. And when I say involved in it, I mean, they're clearly fighting against it. And so obviously are the Russians. And think about this. You know, Russia has literally just threatened to go ahead and bomb U.S., British, French, and at least those three. It has literally threatened to bomb those forces and to take out the people responsible for laying the groundwork for attacks by U.S., French, and UK weapons in Ukraine. And they've said specifically, we're going to respond outside of Ukraine. These things may be connected. You know, we've been told that something is coming to a head. You know, now I think that one of the things that Fulford was saying, the guy in Japan, he was saying that the global Satanists had actually paid both the Israelis and the Iranians to engage in their recent exchange of hostilities with the bombing of the consulate and then the drone strike. And apparently, what they're trying to do is they're trying to stir up chaos in order to buy themselves freedom to operate. They don't seem to be finding it. Now, again, all this stuff could be completely false. All of this stuff could be real, but beside the point. Like maybe all this stuff is actually happening, but it's actually some kind of groundwork for a World War II between BRICS and the US. We don't know. We can't know. We're just we're just the little fish in the ocean seeing these big, huge waves crashing over us as the whales thrash around, and we're just trying to kind of make some sense of all this stuff. But what we can do is we can see that the mainstream narrative is false. Dan in Alabama says, I spotted a Trump body double a few months ago, different teeth. Yeah, apparently the guy who is being put on trial and all that stuff, supposedly the whole Mar-a-Lago Trump is essentially the body double. To be honest, I thought that whoever left office in 2020, when they had that whole scene when we were kind of hoping he'd cross the Rubicon and all that sort of thing, I don't think that was Trump. I think that was his body double. Rania says, I seem to remember that the Khazarians were connected to impersonations. I don't know what you're referring to there, but I will say that that's the term that the guy in Japan likes to use. He likes to talk about the good guys being the White Dragon Society, the bad guys being the Black Khazarian Mafia. The Rogue Roman says, nobody cares about these stupid Trump trials. Who do they think they're persuading? Well, they're not persuading anyone, but they're trying to. Remember, success always plants the seeds for future failure. They've been pulling off this stuff for decades, maybe centuries. They don't know anything else. If for decades you've just made stuff up, put out the nonsense through your pets in the media, and everybody believed it, how would you develop the skill to do anything else? In fact, if you think about it, just step back and be impartial. Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken were complaining about that very thing today. I posted it on the blog. I wasn't actually connecting it to this, but they were saying that it used to be that they could convince people of anything, but because there are 3 channels and they controlled them all. But now with the internet and with all these different sources and everything, I mean, for example, look at us. Here we are in total ignorance. Most of us don't even watch much TV. I don't watch Fox News. I don't watch CNN. I don't watch Sky. I don't watch any of that stuff. But just because I read a few, read a bit of Daily Mail, read a bit of New York Times, et cetera, I know what the mainstream narrative is. And even with my brief exposure to it, I can see that there's some level of fakery going on. And because you've got the internet, because you've got YouTube, because you've got all this stuff out there, you can see when people are talking about stuff that harmonizes with the anomalies that you're noticing. Dan in Alabama says, is Biden even still alive? There's no way to know. Both these guys are unequivocal about the fact that he hasn't, that he ceased to be fake president back in 2021. So, and I will say that, I don't have a lot of connections, and none of them are high level in the various militaries, but they have all been silent. I don't mean like, not particularly talkative. I mean, these are people that I know and talk to on a regular basis, not on a weekly basis, but maybe on a twice a month, that kind of stuff. And they've been silent for like the last 2 months, maybe 3. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least to find out a few months from now that they've been very, very busy dealing with some of this stuff. I don't know. I'm not going to ask. I can't help. I mean, I'd be happy to, but do you need a leather book published? But the point is that it's good for us to pay attention to this stuff, because there's going to come a time when the news is going to start breaking out, and the good guys are going to, assuming that any of this stuff is reasonably true, remotely true, we're the people that need to explain this stuff to the sort of people that still think conspiracy theory is a way to actually dismiss something. Again, I don't know what's going on, but there's definitely something going on, and it isn't just about the Ukrainian war. Which, by the way, I don't know if you noticed on the blog today, but a lot of the stuff that I've been telling you since the beginning was supported by information that recently came out. For example, the Ukrainians came out and said that they were holding a certain number of Russian prisoners. I believe it was 8,000 Donbass militiamen and 500 Russian soldiers. And there were nearly 4 times as many Ukrainian prisoners. So, given that prisoners are usually reflective of casualties, it's very clear that the Ukrainians all along have been taking way more casualties than the Russian forces. But as I said and pointed out 2 years ago, the Russians haven't been using their frontline troops. They haven't been using their best troops. They haven't even been using their conscripts. They've been relying heavily upon the Donbass militias. Now, I suspect they are using their professional soldiers. I expect they are using the engineers. One of the things that the Ukrainians talked about is they don't have anyone to do what the Russians do, which is every time they advance, these combat engineers come in and just build fortifications so that there's no chance of the militias being thrown back. But think about it. Of the of the prisoners of war, 86% of them are not Russian troops. 86% of them are Donbass militia. Fonzie Bear says, I remember you covering that along with the Wagner group. Yeah. In fact, I bet that a lot of those 500 prisoners are actually from Wagner or from one of the other private military companies, because they would be ethnic Russians, but they wouldn't necessarily be Russian soldiers. Another thing to keep in mind is that part of that failed thrust at Kiev that was mostly the Chechens. There were some Russian paratroopers, but a lot of the infantry was the Chechens. So it's very clear that the Russians have been saving their professional forces, in the event that NATO came in. And that's, of course, the other reason why they've been so slow. A lot of people have been kind of impatient, wondering why it's taking Russia so long. And of course, Simplicius and Martynov talk a lot about how well they're doing it to preserve casualties and not take losses. And a big, huge offensive is very expensive in terms of casualties and so forth. I don't think that's the reason. Now, I don't have anywhere near Martynov's professional knowledge. I'm not challenging that at all. I'm simply observing the fact that the militias cannot be used in the same sort of complicated timed operations that a Zhukov-style offensive requires. And so occupation force? No, they're not. It's not occupation force. I think that the professional ground forces are being held in reserve in case they're needed, if for whatever reason the Europeans or the Americans decided to actually enter the country, as France has been threatening. John De La Rose is here. My Arkhaven Knights pal. Good to see you, John. We're just talking about all the high weirdness that's taking place, and the idea that a lot of these mainstream figures are no more. So Fonzie Bear says, I can see how the chain of command wouldn't be as direct. It's not just about chain of command. It's about capacity. The Donbass militias are very, very experienced. They've been fighting for 12 years now. I mean, they're known as the Ukrainians describe them as separatists. So the 8,000 prisoners were all described as separatists. So that means that they're from Donetsk and Luhansk. And if you look at that, you can see why you're not going to see any fancy command and control. You're not going to see any rapid, complicated movements, because a militia force, despite being very, very experienced and being very combat hardened, they're just not trained and equipped the same way. Now, of course, it's not like the Russian armies in World War II necessarily were all that concerned about the training. One of their military doctrines is to keep everything very, very simple so that they can take fairly poorly trained soldiers and make effective use of them. But even so, I think that, we know that they're relying heavily upon the militia. So I suspect that's the main reason you don't use them to do these complicated professional style double envelopments and so forth. You just keep grinding it out. Obviously, they have some of their professional forces involved, because the professional artillery is involved. The Air Force is involved, although again, not very heavily. It's only been in the last 2 months with the development of the glide bombs that they have been able to start using their air superiority. So, so it's interesting to see how this is happening. But like I said, Putin has been very, very specific. He has come right out and said they are fighting against the empire of lies. He said specifically, we are not at war with Ukraine, even though they're invading Ukraine. And so, um, we're literally witnessing some of the most interesting stuff I think that's ever happened in human history. And a lot of this, I'm hoping that within the next year or two, a lot of this stuff is going to be able to come out in the open, and we can learn what was really happening. So, as terms of what we can do, well, same thing as always. Pray and prepare. You know, I mean, I'm assuming pretty much everybody who is watching the stream, has already gunned up and everything else. I'd be kind of shocked if you hadn't. But other than that, and preparing for potential food shortages, and making sure that you have your friends and family around. Those are the important things right now. And now the thing is, this stuff has been going on for decades, so you can't just drop everything and abandon your life and spend all your time poring over conspiracy sites on the internet trying to figure out what exactly is going on. It doesn't matter to you. It doesn't matter to you. You're not being called to do something now. But it's good for you to be prepared just in case you are. The Swiss guy was saying that he got brought in. He became an irregular in the Space Force, just like 9 months ago or 6 months ago or something. He refers to Donald Trump as his commander in chief and points to some U.S. documents that do to a certain extent back up what he's saying. Does that mean that everything that he's saying is absolutely true? I don't think you can assume that. But I think that it would be totally and utterly foolish to completely discount it because of all the anomalies that we have all noticed. Where's Bill Gates? Has anybody seen Bill Gates lately? For all that they were trying to push, they're trying to push another pandemic, but they don't seem to be getting anywhere with it. Is Bill Gates even alive? If you look at his past history, he doesn't appear to be around anywhere. Dan says, Biden renewing Trump executive orders was kind of odd. Exactly. These are the kind of anomalies that make it impossible to discount entirely the things. John Delarose says, I saw Bill at the tennis tournament last month. Were you certain that it was him? Because that's the one thing that I have observed, is that a lot of these people who are reportedly not around anymore don't look like themselves. Biden being the obvious chief example of that. But we'll just have to wait and see. But things are clearly coming to a head. You've got the election coming up in November, obviously, but now you've got all of the same military officers who were going on about Russia running out of ammunition in 2 weeks, 2 years ago. Now they're all saying that Ukraine needs to negotiate a settlement, which is another way of saying they need to surrender now. The potential big dates coming up, you've got the Russian inauguration on May 9th. So there's obviously a possibility that NATO is going to try to do something to disrupt that. The big speculation seems to be focused on the big bridge to Crimea. And then the other big date is May 21st, which is when Zelensky officially becomes illegitimate. That's the date that's the date of the inauguration of the new president of Ukraine, but he canceled the election. And so, and then of course, you've got the whole Gaza cost and what appears to be the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Obviously, the Netanyahu government appears to be in league with the global satanists. So you've got NATO, Zelensky, Soros, etc., etc. But then you've got this massive global movement against them, which, when's the last time you saw the U.S. retreating from a military base in Africa? So anyhow, as Fonzie Bear recommends, stay frosty. Stay optimistic, and keep doing what you're doing, but keep your eyes open. That's all. I'm not saying get all freaked out, get all paranoid, get afraid. And in fact, there is reason to be more cautiously optimistic now than any time since Trump won in 2016. And so stay optimistic, stay in touch, stay in prayer. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.